Hey everybody, this is Joe Pace with Icewater Yoga, and today we're going to be answering the question, am I doing this right? Using 5 very common yoga poses to explain how to do them properly so you don't feel like the confused person in the room when you don't know what the alignment is and maybe the teacher isn't giving you all the alignment cues that you need in the moment. So I've been there when I was first starting out with yoga. I was just a guy, baseball player who wanted to do some yoga. I had no idea what I was doing, and at first it was kind of intimidating because everybody in the room seemed like they knew, and I was kind of afraid to ask because it made me seem like I had no idea what I was doing, which was true. Now, looking back on it, I wish somebody had told me, hey, here are just some really basic things that you now can not really worry about in class so that you can enjoy it a little bit more. So if you've ever found yourself confused and asking yourself or asking somebody who also doesn't know, am I doing this right? This is a great video, especially for athletes who don't always come into a yoga class with a lot of experience. They don't always have time to do a lot of yoga to understand these things. So let's break them down. The 5 poses we're going to be talking about are downward facing dog. Another is a transition between chaturanga and upward facing dog, any forward fold, any lunge, and any twist. Those are the 5, not necessarily specific poses, but poses that all kind of fall into important categories. So downward facing dog to start. The keys here to think about: you want to have a flat back. That is the goal. You don't necessarily want straight knees, but you definitely don't want a rounded back. It brings excess pressure in the shoulder and just also isn't the pose. To set up the hands, you have the hands shoulders width and the index fingers parallel to one another. Spread your fingers wide, and you'll notice by having your index fingers parallel to one another, your wrists are parallel with the front of your mat. That's a good thing that protects the wrist. Your elbows are straight. You're shrugging your ears towards your shoulders, and you're lifting your butt up to the ceiling. That is the key. So your upper body is non-negotiable. The lower body is negotiable. So you absolutely start with bent knees. You work towards straightening the knees. Maybe the heels touch the mat, maybe they don't. That's not necessarily a goal at all. So your knees are bent, your gaze is straight down, and you're reaching the arms like you could through the floor. With the bent knees, you bring pressure out of the low back and excess pressure out of the hamstrings, always working towards straightening the knees. That is downward facing dog. If it doesn't feel comfortable for you, you can always take downward facing dog on the knees. And then you can also take it with hands on blocks. Put both hands on blocks, shoulders width, should be good to go. So the next one is a transition between chaturanga and upward facing dog. It's a really common transition in sun salutations and flow yoga, and it's often done pretty incorrectly and often in a way that's pretty risky for the body. So here's how you do chaturanga and up dog perfectly. Hands are in the same position as they were in down dog. Index fingers parallel, fingers spread wide, wrist creases parallel with the front of the mat. First step is you rock your shoulders forward before you go down to chaturanga. Your hips aren't falling down. Your hips aren't lifting up. They're in a straight line, or they're a midpoint between the crown of your head and your heels, the straight line between them. So the shoulders rock forward, hug the elbows in, keep them by your sides while they stay over the wrists. So you never let the elbows come behind the wrists. Keep them right over the wrists. The shoulders never go below the elbows. Tuck your toes, lift through your chest, engage your quads. You may not be able to go as deep into the back bend. It doesn't even feel good. But what you're doing is by engaging your quads, you're protecting your low back from descending too far and bringing too much back bend into it. And you can lift your chest through your arms. Don't worry about looking up. You can gaze straight forward to start, maybe gaze towards the floor. So that transition is hard for a lot of bodies. Always feel free to take your knees to the mat for chaturanga. Lower the knees first. Keep everything in the upper body the same. For up dog, if that doesn't feel good for your back, take Cobra. Hands stay underneath the elbows. Lift through the chest. It's actually probably going to be more beneficial for you anyway because it strengthens the back more. And then lower, coming back to downward facing dog or whatever pose comes next. Forward folds. See it all the time. People want to have straight legs for some reason. It just makes them feel like they're a better yoga doer. Doesn't matter how straight your knees are. So in any forward fold, whether you're sitting down, whether your legs are spread apart from one another, or whether you're standing, start with bent knees. Okay, so as opposed to starting with straight knees and then taking the rounding into the back and putting pressure in the low back, start with bent knees, forward fold first. Okay, so that gives you so much more space, zero pressure in the low back, not tugging on the hamstrings more than they need to be. Because ultimately what can happen is there's an attachment issue with the hamstring and behind the leg. If you're overstretching your hamstring, that attachment issue is a pain to heal. So don't do that, just avoid it. Work from straight knees, hands will be underneath the shoulders, or maybe even on the shins. And then from there, straighten your knees towards straight, not necessarily too straight. With bent knees, you allow yourself to be in a hamstring stretch that's productive for your body and isn't breaking you down. That can be done seated. Another benefit of being seated is that you have the ability to sit on something. So by elevating the hips, maybe sitting on a blanket, maybe sitting on a block, you also give yourself more space to forward fold. So bent knees, great idea. Lift through your chest, fold over your legs that way. Perhaps maybe not even letting your upper body fall on your legs. Keep the chest lifted, extend the heels away from you as best you can, and then take it gently into the forward fold. Lunges. When it comes to lunges, there's a few cues that happen in yoga class that are very problematic. The main one is bring your front knee to a 90-degree angle. You hear that all the time. Bringing your body into a specific shape, regardless of what that shape is not going to necessarily make sense for everybody because certain bodies can't make certain shapes. Any lunge means that one leg is in front of the body, the other leg is behind. The body is generally facing in a particular direction and one knee is generally bent, if not both. So we'll take any lunge. It can be a high lunge. It can be any warrior pose, warrior 2 or warrior 1. You'll often hear bring your front knee and the angle between your thigh and your shin to a 90-degree angle. So if I do that in this warrior 1 shape, that's a huge stretch. Okay, I can get there and I can support it, but I've been doing yoga for more than a decade. It takes time. I wasn't there at the beginning at all. First step, don't force yourself into any particular shape. The key you need for any lunge is to keep your toes pointing directly straight, your knee pointing in that same direction directly straight, not allowing your knee to fall in or out, keeping the pressure even in the foot so the inside or the outside of the foot isn't feeling more pressure than the other. You do not let your knee come past the ankle ever. Behind the ankle is okay, but ultimately you want the knee right over the ankle. If you can keep the knee over the ankle, pointing in the same direction as your toes, which is directly straight, everything else is optional. You can have the feet closer together, which still I can keep my knee and toes and all that stuff I talked about in line. All the way towards that 90-degree angle we're talking about, the knee stays where it is, the toes are pointing where they need to point. This is not a great shape. This is actually not feeling good in the hips, so I'm gonna come out of it this way. But you see what I mean. You always wanna keep the knee in alignment with the toes and hovering over the ankle. Whether it's warrior 1, 2, or high lunge, that's what you're thinking about. Finally, twists. This is more about the low back than anything. Our lower back likes to hinge front and back. It actually is pretty hypermobile in forward, in extension, in flexion, so back bending and forward bending. But it does not like to twist. The joint spaces in there are a lot crunchier because the bones of the spine are bigger there. And with bigger bones, they don't like to twist. They can move front and back better, not as much with twisting. So we never want to be twisting at really deeply at all in the low back. A little is okay, but to take the low back twist out of the equation, there's a few things. So if you're laying on your back, when we take one leg across the body, what happens is people are thinking, I need to get this knee to the floor. What happens when you do that is my right shoulder, my opposite shoulder, is coming off the mat, and now the twist is in the lower portion of my back more than the middle and upper portion of my back. The middle and upper portion is where you want the twisting to happen, and this is not allowing that to happen. It's bringing excess pressure in the low back. So here, I want to keep my right shoulder blade planted against the floor, and then my right leg comes across the body as much as it can while keeping the right shoulder blade planted against the mat. The twist you'll notice is much more in the middle upper back, protecting the low back. The same principle applies in any twisting pose. For example, a seated twisting pose. This is a half Lord of the Fishes. I have my foot here, and then I can take my front of my elbow to my knee and then twist. What can happen is I start to take the opposite sit bone off the ground and I torque myself deeper. My right sit bone's off the floor, I'm twisting more in my low back. By keeping the sit bone down, my chest elevated, and then twisting from the center point of the chest, then I'm making the twist where I need it to be, not in the low back. Am I doing this pose right? Probably not, right? So there's so many poses, there's so many techniques, there's so much anatomy, there's so much physiology here. There's so many principles that can be said. These 5 are pretty tried and true. There's very little risk in them, and they're gonna keep you safe over time. Next time in a yoga class and you're confused, feel free to reach out and ask me, throw a comment in this video. I'm happy to reply and give you my feedback. And if not, at least you now have a good 5 principles to stick with so you don't feel like that confused person in the corner or in the back of class. Thank you for watching the video. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.